Hey, this is Tommy with AldermanFarms. If you've been watching our channel, you know that I've met a man through the internet named Phil Butler. It's the first time you've heard me say his last name, though. Phil is a viewer who responded to our initial live show where we talked about the dog attack, where I mentioned that I lost my LSU ring. And Phil is an avid metal detector from Indiana, 800 miles away from here, who said, if you need some help, I'm in clubs, and I can look online and put out the word, and we can have some people there to help you find your ring. So Phil is responsible for Bill and Keith and Gary, who came up here from Baton Rouge and Hammond this past weekend to try to find my ring. And I just so thankful that Phil was willing to do that. And he's even connected me with somebody local in Brookhaven who I already knew for a number of years. How crazy is that? Who will probably be coming to try again since we didn't find it Saturday. But anyway, Phil had offered to talk me through how to get the most out of the relatively inexpensive metal detector that we have. And you know what? I had a thought. Hey, Phil, why don't we do that on a Skype call and we'll make a video out of it and other people can learn along with me. And so that's what we did. We set up a Skype call, and Phil was kind enough to walk us through some of the basics of metal detecting. Very interesting conversation. A couple of cool stories he shares with us too. So let's get to it, and we'll do that coming up next. Well, hey everybody, thank you for joining us, and I'm very excited that Phil Butler has decided to join me on this Skype call. He's going to teach me how to be an expert metal detector, right, Phil?
I hope so.
Phil was kind enough to Phil said something to me the other day. I was kind of mully-grubbing about having a little inexpensive metal detector. And Phil said, you're thinking about it all wrong. You know, that the most important tool you have for metal detecting is between your ears. And he wasn't talking about my ears so much, part of it, but he's talking about your brain. So one thing led to another, and we decided to do this Skype call. He had already offered to tutor me on how to get the most out of my bounty hunter metal detector. I don't remember how much we spent for it, 100 and a quarter, something like that. And bought it for Patty a couple of years ago. She had wanted one. And he agreed to help me get the most out of it. And it just occurred to me today while we were messaging back and forth that, well, no, that's not the whole story. Here's the whole story. I had somebody comment on one of our YouTube videos saying, Phil needs to do a YouTube video. And I said, you're right, I'm going to tell him. And I did tell him, and Phil said, no, not ready to do the YouTube videos. I said, well, I got an idea. Here's the next best thing. We'll do a Skype call. You talk to me about metal detecting, and with your permission, we'll record it and share it with our viewers. And so here we are. So Phil, tell us what we need to know as beginning metal detectors.
Oh gosh, I'm not even sure I know where to start.
Well, let's do what we talked about then, Phil. You know basically the type of metal detector I have. Tell me what I need to know to get the most out of my bounty hunter metal detector. Tell me what you were talking about using my brain.
Your bounty hunter metal detector. Uh, Now, I think you've only got two buttons on it. You've got four buttons, an on and off. Then you've got a button that will discriminate out different targets, knock them out. That's the one on the left, I think,
Yes.
on the bottom.
Yes, it says target. It says target
Yeah,
reject.
you can use that. I don't ever use that kind of thing, very rarely. And the other button is to set your like your power level. You know,
Yeah, it says depth select.
that more or less adjusts your power up and down. Uh, you for something shallow, if you're just looking for, like you would be looking for your ring, you could use it on the lowest power level. If you were at the home site you talk about, looking for old coins that might be 6 inches deep, then you would turn it up. But you have to be careful when you turn it up, because sometimes when you turn them wide open, they they act erratically. That one, yours may not, but a lot of the higher end models will turn up high enough that that it really hurts you more than it helps you. And your detector makes three tones. It makes a tone for iron and then a mid-range tone that is for cans, pull tabs, nickels will also be in there, and maybe zinc pennies on yours. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can tell you, Phil. Give me just a second here, and I'll tell you, and I'll show the audience. I don't know if they'll be able to see it, but at the top here, there's a little grid that says probable target. On the left, there's a box that says iron. The next box has, I'm assuming those are chemical signals. Symbols. I've been a long, element, whatever. It's AL, I'm assuming means aluminum, and ZN, which I'm assuming means zinc. Then right next to that, there is another box that says AL, and in that same box right next to it, it says 5 cents. And then to the far right, there's a fourth box that has the word coins in it.
Yeah, that will be for any copper or silver coins, or your modern clad coins. All those, the old pennies made before 1982, new or old dimes, quarters, half dollars, silver dollars will all hit in that far right column. The nickel will hit in the one that says AL and 5 cent, and the zinc penny will hit in the other one. I think it's kind of funny because actually the nickel and the zinc penny should be transposed. I
Oh,
mean, in
really?
the order, yeah, by the conductivity of the metal, the zinc penny is a higher conductor, higher reactivity conductor than the nickel. Nickels
Ah,
are really the hardest coin to find just because of what they're made of. They sound almost the same as a pull tab. Even on an expensive, I've got some expensive metal detectors, and of course you have the sound and an indicator to show what target it thinks is under your coil.
yeah,
And like on some of mine have multi frequencies. So, with my experience, I know that, gold reacts to the higher frequencies, silver reacts to the lower ones, and I know what the different metals do. So I can look to see which frequency is the strongest, which will give me an indication of the metal. What it shows as far as mine will go in numbers, like say from 0 to 100, and yours just has the four little columns. I have like
yeah,
three or four things. I've even got one detector that will show me the shape, whether what I've got my coil over is round or if it's irregularly shaped.
wow,
Because
wow,
there's so many. Well, the little metal end off a pencil eraser.
yeah,
If
yeah,
you break that off, okay, that sounds identical to a nickel.
huh,
And some of the old round pull tabs that had the ring and the tab together, those sound like a nickel. And most people don't dig nickels because they don't like digging that stuff. But with some of my metal detectors, I can differentiate enough that where they may get 1 out of 10 nickel signals they dig actually be a nickel, I might get 8 or 9 out of 10.
ah. It is funny. You mentioned two things. You mentioned that rang a bell with me. Uh, Thinking back toward the day that we had here Saturday when the gentleman that you put us in contact with came. You may have seen at least reference to one of this on the video that we put out about that day where Gary, one of the guys, made the comment. He found a pull tab and he described them as y'all. He said our talking about metal detector people. He said these are our nemesis, and so it's funny. Now I thought he meant. So I assumed what he meant by that was when you're looking for a ring. So I don't know, but he may have meant just generally speaking that those pull tabs, show up everywhere when you're looking for stuff. And so, you might want to comment on that further. And the second thing was, now you're explaining how your detector works. Something else they said made sense to me, that when they were talking to each other about what range certain sounds were falling in, and that makes sense to me that their metal. I didn't look at the operating face, the instrument panel on any of theirs, but it makes sense to me the way you explain that's what they were talking about, the range of signal that they were getting.
Well, the thing about gold, and gold is different than any other metal when it comes to metal detecting, because on iron, say iron will hit at a iron will either hit down in the iron range, like it shows on your metal detector, or sometimes there's what we call a wraparound effect, which and like if you happen to sweep across a piece of iron and there's a sharp point on it, it can actually give a high coin signal. Now, there's ways to tell it isn't, but iron generally, most everything you find, every metal except gold, will hit in a very predictable area. But gold, according to its purity, its size, the shape, can hit anywhere from iron clear up to the high coin.
Wow.
For instance, I've looked for a set of the diamond stud earrings. I looked for one of those lost. Well, normally what I do is if somebody has a lost item, like an earring, I will ask them if they have something similar to what they lost. Maybe the mate, if it's an earring, or a similar ring or something. And I use that to give me a range, just kind of a guideline to look at. Well, I got this lady's pierced earring, and it was in the exact same, it was in the iron range, just like a nail or something like that would be. And what was worse was it was so small that even my metal detectors that were made to pick up gold would only pick it up at a couple inches.
Wow.
Now, if you want to hear something, this is kind of humorous. I have a White's metal detector that I probably have over $2,000 in. Okay, I took this metal detector and was going to use it because it has a program specifically for gold. And I figured, well, I'm looking for a small piece of gold. I'll use this one. Well, I also have a bottom of the line starter model Tesoro. Now, for some reason, a lot of people with experience like me will have one of these little Tesoros. That should tell you something. I mean, it's not uncommon at all to find somebody that has 7 metal detectors, all of them high dollar, but they'll have one of these. They only have a single tone. They've got one knob on them. But because of the frequency this little metal detector operates at, it picked up that little gold, the mate to that gold earring, as well as my $2,000 White's metal detector did.
Really?
And it's a $150 metal detector.
I may need you to get me to send me the link to that.
Well, the thing with the metal detector, the ring you lost, any metal detector will pick up that size gold.
Okay.
The only time gold is really hard to find is if you're looking for something very small, like a diamond stud earring, or if you're looking for gold nuggets, because most of those are extremely small compared to gold jewelry. And then you use a specialized metal detector to hunt gold with. They operate like a hobby metal detector will operate in usually the 5 to 15 kilohertz range, and one that is made specifically to find tiny gold will operate in the, say, 20 to 70 kilohertz range. And that makes it, the higher frequency makes it more sensitive to small pieces of gold.
I see. That makes sense.
But normally gold jewelry you can find with any, even an inexpensive bounty hunter starter model will find a gold ring, like a wedding band or an engagement ring or something like. I found my first engagement ring with the Bounty Hunter Tracker 4, which is a model a step below what you have.
Really? Wow. That's encouraging. You know what? Something occurs to me, Phil. We're going to have people watching this video who don't even own a metal detector, but they may their interest may be piqued because of our story, and because we've been talking about metal detecting on a couple of different videos here. And there may be people watching who don't even understand how metal detecting works. If I were to tell the truth, I might be one of them. So tell me what's happening. Describe to the viewers what's happening. How does this device that I'm holding over the ground, how does it detect anything? What is it, sonar? What's going on?
It transmits a radio signal into the ground. And see, the coil on your metal detector is actually two antennas. Now, the inner circle of that coil is probably the transmit coil. And that sends out a signal into the ground. And it works, I guess you could say, kind of like a radar. I don't know how to exactly explain it in simple terms. But when that signal hits on a piece of conductive material like iron, copper, zinc, something metal, part of that signal will reflect back, and then the bigger coil on the outside will pick that up. And then it uses the circuitry in the metal detector to kind of determine what that material was and how deep it is.
I'm no scientist, but that sounds suspiciously like sonar to me.
Well, sonars with sound, it would be more like radar, which uses
Okay,
an
yeah,
electrical signal, a
I
radio
guess you're
signal.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, the one of the things we were talking about offline before we started recording this conversation, you were telling me a humorous story about. I guess I could describe it as when you learned not to discount these lower end detectors. Why don't you share that with the viewers? The story you were telling me.
Well, it kind of enforces, there's a saying in metal detecting that you need to beware of a man with one metal detector because he probably knows how to use it. Because most of us, if we've been into it very long, I'm trying to think, I think I have at least 6. And I know guys that probably have collections that would dwarf mine. But I met up with an older gentleman at a park in a town nearby, and I just bought my first, what I'll call a high dollar metal detector, a high power, high dollar. And I thought I was in high cotton because that thing was just, I was going to be pulling coins out right and left. And, I really felt kind of bad because this man who I was meeting for the first time showed up, and he had probably $150 a Tesoro brand metal detector, just a very basic metal detector. And, I felt kind of bad because he seemed like a nice guy, and I didn't want to embarrass him. He just, I didn't want to make him feel bad. But
Yeah.
we decided we were going to go out in the park, and we were going to metal detect for about an hour, and then we'd meet back up and compare what we found. So we each headed our separate ways. And at the end of the hour, we meet up at a shelter house, and he says, well, how did you do? And, of course, I was really proud. I reached in my pocket, and I pulled out a handful of coins and laid them out on the table. Lloyd, this older guy, he looks at it, he says, well, you did pretty. He was being real nice. You did real good. How long have you had that metal detector? Oh, I just got it. But, this thing really, it does it all. I said, well, how did you do? And he says, well, I didn't do bad. And he starts reaching into his pocket where your coin. A lot of guys carry a nail apron. They put their fines in the
Right,
trash.
right.
He reached
These
into
guys
whatever
had.
he reached into whatever it was he was carrying, and you could see he was trying to get everything in his hand, and he reaches in there and he comes out and he dumps a pile that's bigger than what I already put out there on the table. Then he goes back in there again, and he reaches out and he pours. Well, by the time he got done, he probably had a stack of coins. I'll guess he had 3 for every one I'd found. And
Oh
here
my
I
goodness.
was the one with. So that taught me right there that, just because you have a high dollar metal detector,
Yeah,
doesn't mean you're going to do the best. It's the guy that knows
yeah,
how to operate his equipment.
yeah.
And that's the biggest thing in any piece of metal detecting equipment is is learning how to interpret what the metal detector signal tells you.
Well, what are there any other tips that you can, things that you learned when you were first getting started?
One thing that's really important when you start out metal detecting is you have to keep your swing, your sweep of your coil consistent. You want to make sure when you're swinging that coil back and forth that if, on a surface target, it doesn't matter, but if you're going after a coin 4 inches deep, the type of coil you have on your metal detector, the deeper the target is, the smaller the area that coil is actually looking at. Where on the ground, you pretty much have complete coverage. If you lay a coin on top of the ground and hold your coil up as high as you can get it, where it still picks up the coin, you will find out that it will only do that with that coin going directly through the center of the coil, right across the middle of it. If you get out to the edge much either way, it won't pick it up. So when you're looking for old coins with that metal detector, you have to overlap your swings. And I call it the Tim Conway walk. Because with a concentric coil, I don't know if you remember the old Carol Burnett show, and Tim Conway would play the old man that took the little steps, and that's about how fast you have to go, because to completely cover that ground, and you still won't cover it all. I don't care how careful you are. You never you to completely hunt a piece of ground, you have to do what we call grid hunt, which means you walk in a straight line. You pick out an area, and you have a 3 or 4 foot path on one side of the area. You go down through it. You start back the other way right next to that, and you have your swing overlapped enough that you're completely covering it. Well, after you get through going, say, north and south, then you might go east and west, and then you might go corner to corner, and I'll guarantee you that you'll still find things. If you're looking, I don't care how good you look. I have sites. Now, my favorite sites are what I call field sites. Corn, soybean fields around here that all you see is corn or soybean in the field. Well, I use old plat maps from the 1860s, 1870s, and I look for where home sites were on property that, now it's a field, but back then there might have been a cabin on it.
Yeah, yeah.
And nobody's looked there because there's no signs. There's no trees. There's nothing that would indicate a home's there. And I can go there and, oh gosh, I've got 4 home sites in the field behind my house, and the oldest coins I've found there have been like I've found large pennies, 2 cent pieces, different types of Indian head pennies. One of my friends found a bust dime, which the bust series is the first series of silver change that the U.S. had. I think they quit making those in 1830. But yeah, you have to be one of the most important things is you have to keep the speed of your coil and the swing of it. If you're swinging and then advancing a foot and swinging back, well, you'll still find some things, but I can come along behind you with my metal detector and probably find twice. I can use your metal detector and find twice what you did if all I do is tighten it up and make sure that I'm actually covering more of the ground. That keeping the height of your metal detector consistent. A lot of metal detectors, if you bump them on the ground, will false. They'll give an indication like a coin. They'll go off. There won't be anything there, but it's because you hit it. So there's just little things like that you have to be aware of. It just takes lots of practice.
Sure. But tell me this. Talk about, if you would, and if you can, and if not, we'll edit it out. Talk about you did, and you kind of mentioned this, but let's say those the viewers who may be watching who already have a metal detector, they live in a suburb or something, they don't, and they're looking for places to go metal detect. So, first question would be, how, as an experienced metal detector, how do you go about finding places that you want to, number one, want to go, number two, can go? How do you approach say, a landowner to maybe get permission, things like that, and then maybe segue into the, for lack of a better term, the ethics of metal detecting. You know, what are the rules of the game? Is, and I know that there are some, like, you know, you always leave the ground better than when you got there, things like that.
You want to leave it like people don't know you've been there. If if you dig and leave real obvious places in the ground, nobody's going to want you to come and metal detect in their yard. I'm not a real good one to ask about how to get permission because I live in a fairly, well, I want to say, well, there's 20,000 people in the county I live in 400 square miles. And my wife came from a large family. Now, I didn't grow up around here. I was born here, but my dad was in the military. And whenever I find a place, I see a place I want to go detect, I say, well, I'd like to go look at that place. And my wife will say, well, and she knows who it is. And I said, well, call them up. But most people have to just ask. And now I'll tell you permission I got, and it was I won't say knock and ask, but in the county seat, the town where I live, there is a historical mansion. Now it's on the National Historic Register, so you can't metal detect it. But this was before it was on there. It was privately owned. It was owned by a Civil War general who later was president of a bank. It's a large. Well, they called it a mansion. It's a very large 4-story house, and even today sits on 2 acres of ground. And I was up there one day and metal detecting the strip in between the street and the sidewalk. That grass strip is publicly owned. You don't have to have permission. Now, I ask if I'm, in front of somebody's house, but I was kind of on the edge of this property. I really wasn't too worried about it. And while I was going down through there metal detecting, a lady came out from the home and she stood and watched me and she said, I noticed that you're real careful when you dig. And she talked to me a little bit about metal detecting and I said, well, you don't mind me doing this, do you? And she said, oh no, I don't have a problem. I said, well, you care if I look between the sidewalk and your fence? Because it had a big wrought iron fence clear around the property. And she said no, and I looked a little bit. She kind of followed me along. Well, I knew nobody had ever been granted permission to use a metal detector on this property. 2 acres of an 1870s mansion. That's, for a
Oh,
metal detector guy,
man.
that's prime
Yeah.
real estate.
Yeah,
So
that's the mother. That's the mother load.
after she talked to me a little bit, I said, "What would you do? You think you would consider giving me permission to come onto the property and use my metal detector there?" And she said, "Well, no, you can come over here and metal detect." And I said, "Well, would it be all right if I brought like 1 or 2 of my friends because you've got a large property?" And she said, "Sure, that's no problem." And I said, "Well, would it be all right to come tomorrow?" And she said, "Oh yeah, that's no problem." And I'm just, I was trying to be real calm, but in my mind, I'm doing backflips and everything else because I just
Yeah.
got permission to hunt where nobody else in 30 years had gotten permission. And as she walks off, she says, "I'll tell my boyfriend you're coming over." And then I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to show up there tomorrow, and this boyfriend's going to answer the door, and he's going to say, "What do you guys want? I don't know you. Hit the road." So I'm kind of bummed out, but I go ahead and I call 2 of my friends and I tell them, and of course they're really excited too. So we pull up, and this site at one time had been a restaurant for a short time, so it had a big asphalt parking lot at the back of it. And we pull up in the parking lot and walk up to the front door, and I said, "Well, guys, be ready because it was his girlfriend that gave me permission, and the owner might have different thoughts." And I was hoping she would answer the door, but when I knocked on the door, this fella answers the door, and I introduced myself and my friends and told him who I was, and he didn't really seem too hostile about it. And he says, "Well, guys, I'm getting ready to leave for the day. So I'm thinking, here it comes. He's going to tell us
Yeah.
not. He says, nobody's going to be here. So if you get thirsty, he said, if you come in the door here and go down the hallway, the second room on the right is the kitchen, and I've got iced tea and pop and stuff in the refrigerator. And he said,
Wow.
now if you have to use the bathroom, he said, you go down that hallway there, and there's a bathroom. And I looked at him. His name was Roger. And I said, Roger, we're right here in town. Please lock the house up when you leave. Because this man had it was a 4-story house, and it was just full of stuff. I mean, good, expensive stuff. So I said, we're right here in town. If we need a drink or to go to the bathroom, we'll just hop in the vehicle and drive to the convenience store or McDonald's or someplace. I said, please lock it up. So yeah, he said he let me detect there for a whole year. And I mean,
Wow.
I had a Ziploc baggie full of silver coins, Indian head pin, all kinds of old coins. I found 2 gold rings. My friend found a gold watch. I found all this stuff, and at the end of a year, I took all of it back to his house. And of course, the one bad thing was I like to talk, and Roger liked to talk. So I'd have a lot of days I'd go there, and I would get there, say at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, and Roger would answer the door, and at 3 o'clock we'd still be standing there talking about something. And I'd finally say, well, Roger, I want to go out here and metal detect. So I spent more time talking a lot of days than I ever did detecting. But, I enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong. And he was a wonderful man. Well, at the end of the year, I brought everything I'd found to his house, and I put it on the table in his living room. And I said, Roger, I want you to go through there and pick out anything you want. He said, I don't want any of it, Phil. And I said, yeah. He says, you found it. And I said, yeah, but Roger, if you hadn't given me permission to look, I wouldn't have any of it. Well, I said, look through it and see if there's anything you want. Well, he looked through it, and I had 2 1908 silver quarters. And he picked up one of them, and that's the only thing he would take
Wow.
for all the stuff I found there. And he let me come back. I'd go back. I went back there for 4 or 5 years, and I'd find every time I'd get a newer metal detector, I would go back and look again, and I'd always find more silver, more Indian head pennies. So you never hunt someplace out. The easy targets might be gone, but there's still targets there.
Yeah. It's funny. They, I don't remember if it was Keith or Gary or Bill who said this about our what we call the home place back in the woods. But I get where he was going based on that story. He said the way that you hunt a place like this is you don't come back here and spend all day. You come back here 3 hours at a time. And I think what he was getting to is that this is something that you can hunt successfully for a very long time. This area, and so
I have field sites near me that I have hunted for, and around here we don't use moldboard plowing, the deep plow. Now everything's no-till. Well, with no-till, it doesn't bring anything up. The old moldboard plowing would bring new fines up every year because it goes down so deep and turns the ground over. Even without moldboard plowing, there's a field site a mile north of my house that I've gone back to for 8 years, and I still make fines. I
wow.
mean, I've found a large cent. Have you ever seen a 3-cent piece?
No, didn't
That's a
know there ever
very
was
well. They
one.
made 2 different kinds, but a silver 3-cent piece is probably the smallest silver U.S. coin. I mean, it's a tiny coin,
I guess
and
so.
I found one there. I find Civil War buttons. One of the fellows that goes to my church just started in metal detecting, and he was with a friend of mine and found a Confederate States part of a 2-piece sword belt plate,
Wow.
which is, those are anything Confederate is rare. But in Indiana, we didn't have any battles in Indiana, so it would have been lost by a veteran. So he found that, and I'm thinking, I'm thinking that the half of the buckle he got, he was tickled to death. He sold it for $1,200 or $1,500 to a collector.
Wow.
And some of the most of the stuff you find isn't going to be worth a lot of money. To me,
Sure.
my all my fun is in the finding of it, the challenge of looking for. Anymore, if I go to a farm and look in a field, if I find the typical Indian head pennies, 2-cent pieces, things I have bags of, I usually give everything I found to the farmer. So if they, a lot of them want, like, their families owned it, and maybe one of their relatives lost it. Like I gave a farmer a whole 1868 2-cent piece I found on his family's original home place site, because his grandparents got married in 1868, and this 2-cent piece was whole, had a hole in it so you could hang it like a necklace. And I said, well, back then a lot of people didn't have money for rings, and this might have been a coin that your great grandfather or whatever relation it was, he might have given your great grandmother a coin, made the year they were married, to commemorate it. So I gave that to him.
That's neat. That's neat. Let me ask you this, because and you've kind of talked around it. So, when let's go back to the mansion that you were talking about earlier, for lack of a better term, but it applies to anybody else's property. When you approach somebody, it's an interesting site and most of our viewers may want to be doing this at home, like me. And like me, I'm not interested in finding things to sell. I'm interested in finding things like Tomas found, a section of an old crosscut saw that probably my great grandfather used. But if you're going to someone else's property, and you're making the approach to ask for permission, do you talk about up front who gets to keep what you find? How do you handle that kind of stuff?
I usually do that, and it varies with the guys that are actually involved in the hobby. Some people don't want to give anything up. I mean, if you tell them that, if you as the property owner say, "Well, I would like to have something," they'll turn around and leave. Most guys aren't like that. My angle from it, if I'm talking to somebody I don't know, is, any personal items from your family that I find are yours. I'll give them back, no question. If I find common old coins and you don't have any, I'll be glad to share them with you. I expect to keep most of them. If I find something like a key date coin, which is a coin that very few were minted of that year, or a semi key date coin, something that's worth, or a gold coin, for instance. Okay, I consider anything that's worth much money, say over $50. That will be something that, if you want it, that's fine. We'll go to the coin shop and find out the fair market value of it, and you give me half. If I want to keep it, I'll give you half. What I want to be fair about it.
Yeah, and that sounds perfectly fair to me. I would take that deal if somebody approached me.
I always say, if they've lost something, uh, I'd be glad I'll look for it while I'm there if I find it, or if I just run across something and they say, "Oh, that was my grandmother's." I give it back to them. It means more to them than it does me.
Yeah, sure.
It's just a find. Yeah, I've found stuff in strange places. I think the strangest things I've found are, I found a wedding ring for a farmer that was in a semi trailer of shelled corn.
Ha!
He'd lost his wedding band when he was putting the tarp on. I've found, let's see, another strange thing was the local veterinary lost a set of clamps. He had a clamp he used when he neutered horses, and they called me one day and said they'd lost it, and it was the only one they had. And if I wouldn't come find it, that they were going to have to hire somebody to come in there and look through this. It was in a big stall covered with straw, about a foot deep. And then here recently, the last thing I found was, I had a guy call me up that had lost his brand new Android cell phone in a 160-acre field. And he wanted to
Oh,
know, well, that sounds hard, but I'll tell you what I did. He told me, of course, the first thing I said was, are you think you ran over it with a tractor? And he said, no, I've been out looking for it for 3 days. I have two cell phones just alike, and evidently the Androids have a Find My Phone app. And he'd gone out in the field and using this GPS locator had actually tried to find it. And he took me out, and I said, well, take me back to where you were looking. And he took me back there, and I walked around for just a minute where he thought it was. And I said, are you sure this is where you, I said, GPSs are accurate within probably 15 or 20 feet. And he gets on and he's having to switch back and forth between the program that shows where his lost phone is and the phone he was using where the GPS locator said he was. And I said, I want you to switch back and forth until when you switch screens, those don't move, or I'm going to be here for hours. And so he walked around, and he ended up being about 40 feet from where he was sure that that was where he lost it. And I said, you stand right there. And I took my metal detector and circled around him. And when I got 5 feet away from him, I found him.
wow.
So he wanted to give me $100 for finding this, I don't know, 600 or 700. And I told him, I said, this is my hobby. I don't take money for it. I said, if you have, a field with an old home site on it, that's fine. If you don't have anything like that, the guy that gave him my name was a farmer that he was related to and was related to my wife. And I said, they let me detect their property, so, you don't have to give me anything. And he still stuck, I don't know, $40 in my pocket when I walked off, and he wouldn't take it back. But I don't charge to find stuff. I get so much enjoyment out of being able to hand somebody back something that they've given up for lost. That really makes me feel good to know that I've given them back something that they've given up hope of finding.
Well, that I could tell that was the motivation for Keith and Bill and Gary. This past weekend they were dead set that they were going to be the heroes. And they just were so dejected. And like I said, we ended up being fine and having a great day. But even when they left, they were like, "We're so sorry." And I said, "Guys, don't worry about it. This is not gonna, this is not the end of my world. Is it important to me? Yeah, for sentimental reasons and other reasons, but it is what it is. I mean, and I told them I know three things for sure. Number one is God knows exactly where that ring is. Number two is if He wants me to have it back, I will. But number three is if He doesn't want me to have it, I won't. So, and when you know those things, it kind of takes the pressure off.
Yeah, most of us are tickled to death if we get a picture of you holding the ring that they found. If we see that, that's what we go for. That's our reward. We can show our friends, look, I found this for this man, and here it is with him, reunited with it. We get a kick out of that.
Well, Phil, I've enjoyed it. It's been very informative. Is there, before we wrap up, is there anything that pops into your head that information we just must have that you haven't already divulged for us?
I'll probably think of lots of stuff when we get off here. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to have you right here, with me with the metal detector, and what takes a half hour to explain, I could probably show you in just a few minutes.
Well, I'll tell you what, probably, if I had to guess, when I publish this video, and I'm not sure when it'll be, how long it'll take me to edit it, but when the video is published, we're going to get some questions. And so what we may do is, depending on the volume of questions that we get, we may do this again if you're game, and answer the questions on a video.
Well, I don't care. I don't mind a bit.
Yeah, you ain't got nothing to do, so.
I'm retired. One thing I have to do is take my wife out to eat.
Well, we'll try to schedule it on a night when that ain't happening.
Oh, well, now she doesn't go at night. She likes those senior citizen specials in the afternoon.
Phil, you probably shouldn't have said that on a video all over YouTube. She may not
Oh, well,
appreciate.
she just have to learn to live with it.
That's right. All right. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate Phil taking his time to do this. We've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did, and just as I hoped, I learned some stuff, and I'm excited to get out and put into practice some of the tips that Phil shared with us. And as you heard me mention in the video, I think I did. I'm not sure if I'd stopped recording by the time I said this. Oops. If you have questions, I told Phil our viewers are going to have questions about metal detecting. Put them in the comments of this video. And what Phil has agreed to do is that I'll collect some questions for a week or so or whatever. And he's gracious enough to say that we could do an additional Skype call in which he will answer your questions. So I thought that was very kind of him, and I'm very appreciative of that. So do that. Put your questions for Phil into the comments of this video. Would you do that? And look, if you haven't subscribed to us, why don't you go ahead and do that? We would certainly appreciate it, and we appreciate all of your likes, all of your comments. If you know somebody who's just getting into metal detecting, share this video with them. We would appreciate it because it helps the YouTube algorithm say, hey, this must be a pretty intriguing video. Anyway, we appreciate all of you as always, and we'll talk again soon.